Right, thank you everyone. We are going to get underway. So, welcome to this event, which is entitled Devolution and the Mission of National Renewal. I'm Tom Brake, the Director of Unlock Democracy, and I'm very pleased to have with me on the panel Maya Kermer-Schwartz, who is the leader of Islington Council, Jonathan Davies, who is one of the authors of this report, Power to the People, which you can find online on Unlock Democracy's website, and the Compass one as well, and also Francis Foley, the Deputy Director of Compass. And without further ado, because I know that Claire can't stay for the whole event with us, I'm going to ask Jonathan to kick off with some background on the Power to the People report and some of its conclusions.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you first off to Unlock Democracy and Compass for the opportunity to do this work. We hope that our report will turn out to be useful to the government and, of course, the wider English devolution community. I co-authored this report with my former colleague, Professor Arianna Giovannini, who is now based at the University of Urbino in Italy, so she's some distance from your list, but she is really the expert on devolution rather than myself. Our brief was to undertake a review and synthesis of a small number of key documents that cover the theme of English devolution. And based on that review, we set out recommendations which we hope will support the evolutionary agenda. And the recommendations that we put forward obviously build on the platform of the work that we review, so we don't want to claim that they're in any way hours and hours alone. We're very much building on the platform that other people have built with this piece of work. So we selected 5 recent reports that look at different aspects of central-local relations and the devolutionary question. So we don't cover the whole universe of really brilliant work on English devolution. There's an awful lot of it out there, but we think that our review does cover most of the bases. So the documents that we settled on were Devolving English Government by Kenny and Newman, published by the Institute for Government and the Bennett Institute, the Brown Report of the Commission on the UK's Future, a briefing on the Labour Party's Take Back Control Bill. This is the Take Back Control Bill that was published whilst Labour was in opposition, and the briefing was prepared by the Society for Labour Lawyers, the Constitution Group, and John Tennant. We also looked at 3 interrelated documents produced by the Fabian Society. One called A Good Life in All the Regions. The second was called Equality and Empowerment. And the third one is called Plans for Power. And the last one we looked at is the one authored by Kaya and her colleagues. The new local report, Labour Vision for Community Power. Now, this is a particularly important document because this really reflects the view, almost the manifesto of Labour leaders in local government, and shows that there is a real appetite out there in the sector for devolution. In addition, we drew on a survey of local leaders that was undertaken by Unlock Democracy whilst we were conducting this research. And that actually reinforced the key message that comes out of the new local report, which is that local government is ready for radical devolution. I must say that we found the review process very enlightening and see great merits in all the work that we reviewed. So thanks are due to the authors for providing us with such rich source material for our own analysis.
The clients in front of.
In terms of how we went about it, we developed 14 criteria to map the reports, looking at all the political, economic and process elements of devolution in a holistic way. And then following the OECD's approach, we grouped the criteria under the themes of power, money and governance. But in addition to that, we included a theme on political culture, which we think is very important but an often overlooked aspect of this whole debate. And then we looked separately at the plausibility of implementing the recommendations in the different reports over 2 terms of a government committed to devolution. And our conclusion is that there is now a significant opportunity for a bold reforming government to deliver a step change over 1 or 2 terms in partnership with regional and local governments. A few remarks on our key recommendations. This is all in our report, which hopefully you all will have seen and you can access free of charge online. Well, first of all, to reiterate, we recommend a holistic approach to devolution, working on all the kind of economic, political, cultural, and institutional, geographic elements in tandem. So we would see it as a mistake to frame devolution purely in terms of its utility for growth. It has to be an awful lot more than that. Second, we concur with the idea articulated by the new government that a major reset in central-local relations is needed, with new institutional arrangements to establish a partnership and new ways of working across the whole of government. But we suggest that reset needs to start with a fundamental question, really, of what local government in England is for in the 21st century and what the allocation of powers and responsibilities ought to be between central and local levels. So doing that would establish clear principles for moving forward the government departments, including the fearsome Treasury, would then be expected to adapt to. So to that end, we recommend a convention on the future of English governance where all interested parties can thrash those big questions out, which is then going to be followed by English subsidiarity legislation to begin enshrining those principles in the Constitution. And of course, the Take Back Control Bill provides a platform that can be used for those sorts of purposes. Thirdly, well, we know that local government is facing a major fiscal crisis born of a prolonged ideological assault over many, many years and the downloading of austerity on our towns and cities. So devolutionary measures, whatever they might be, also have to guarantee that the worst off towns and cities are able to raise sufficient revenues not only to meet basic statutory minima, but also the broader needs and aspirations of citizens that are articulated through the democratic process. We applaud the government for taking up proposals for longer-term funding settlements, getting rid of the Dragon's Den approach to programme funding. We also support the growing movement for reviving total place type approaches that has been articulated by John Denham and others. But I just want to come back finally to the point about governance cultures. We're not under any illusions that we can do it without a major structural and institutional reset. But we also think that in the past, ministers from both parties of government have assumed that they have an axiomatic right to tell local government what to do. And of course, a recent example of that, which set my teeth on edge, was under the previous government, the minister, Lee Rowley, ordering South Cambs to stop experimenting with a perfectly progressive, rational, and indeed potentially hopeful experiment with a 4-day week. That is exactly the kind of control freakery that we really need to move away from. The term control freakery was coined by my former distinguished colleague in local government studies, Professor David Wilson, who was my dean when I moved to DMU in 2011. So control freakery is really a ministerial reflex that needs challenging. and not least that ministers themselves should be aware of this reflex and challenge their own behaviours if we're serious about devolution. Devolution has to be about local democracy and local empowerment, and for that reason, we also support the idea that what used to be called double devolution, that's the terminology picked up in the Brown Commission, but that could be revived and obviously innovated for current times. But control freakery isn't the only problem. There's also what another one of my former colleagues, Colin Copus, called municipal Stockholm syndrome, where local authorities have been too timid to act at times, to use things like the power of general competence. And an important element in the reform process is therefore to inspire a sense of powerfulness in local government, which is a term that Michael Lyons used in his review going back, I think it was 2006. So to conclude then, we see major opportunities to shift the dial here, and we welcome steps that are already being taken, the refreshing change of narrative that the Local Government Chronicle referred to in a piece earlier this month. But it will take a huge effort to push the agenda forward, resisting the many forces of inertia that we all know about. We think it can be done. Our report argues that it can be done. And so the message is really, let's keep the momentum going.
Thank you very much, Shanton. Okay, Kaya, very much at the sharp end of actually delivering these things, and give us your thoughts, please.
So what I would start by saying is that 14 years of austerity has had to actually make us step up into a lot of these spaces. So for me, it's interesting that the new government is looking at devolving employment services from the DWP. In Islington, we have a very developed employment service, and we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of residents in to work through it. We've been able to be targeted and reflective of our communities. We've worked with London Met to actually look at, so for example, we wanted to improve BME employment, but actually in a place where, in Islington, where BME is anything from a Swiss lawyer to, someone, a Somali mum of 7, we really needed to use the data to find out where we'd have the most impact, that we could use our partners in London Met to help us with that. And doing that means that we know our community and we're able to move the dial really forward in a way that the DWP would never be able to. So I think that our new government really gets that local government should be the delivery arm of their ambitions, and that's really exciting. And I have to say, what the professor said about control freakery has been felt by us so deeply. For example, many of you may know that in London we have a particular problem with falling roles in schools. So we, because of birth rate falls, because of Brexit, because of the extreme high crisis in housing in London, there's just not enough for children. And we actually had a school that requires improvement and was in one of our lowest areas for children. And we put forward an application, because we're actually responsible for managing school places. We put forward an application to get rid of that school and therefore strengthen the other local schools around it, because we know our community. And that school applied for a academy order, and I literally went to the previous school minister, Nick Gibb, and said, this makes no sense. And he said, academies drive improvement. I said, that may well be the case, Minister, but we're actually talking about viability in numbers. And it was that level of control freakery that meant we were in an invidious situation of, having another school come through our system when we really, really didn't need it. So that is to say that that's why this step change is really needed. And it's brilliant, I know it's only been 2 months of the new government, But having people like Georgia Gould, having Jim McMahon as the minister, who have been leaders of councils, get this in a way that is really important. And it's just so exciting and hopeful, whether it be, as I said, employment services, or actually what we're looking at as a possibility is, that migration hotels were a thing that the last government set up kind of on us. So we have private security companies running migration hotels in our borough, which has been a nightmare in health, in safeguarding. We've literally in Islington pretty much kicked down the door to wrap around voluntary services around it. And being able to have a conversation about doing things like that differently. And actually, we've done lots of migration settlement in the borough really positively. So it's just really hopeful. But what I would say, and in the community power report that I was part of, what's really important is that this is not a conversation about local government getting more power and resource, although that has to be part of it and it has to be properly structured, as the report says. It's also about us having a mature conversation with our residents. So in Islington, we've been doing a lot of things around participatory budgeting, holding panels around really important topics like climate resilience, enabling people to vote for improvements on their estate because they live there. They know what they want on their estates. And we shouldn't, I think it's brilliant and a real sign of maturity from the new government not to see working and sharing resource and power, for a lack of a better term, as a threat, but actually as an enabler for their vision.
Thank you very much. So, there's some real practical examples, particularly that one of education, where local authorities have responsibilities, but often without the power to actually deliver on that agenda. Now, Francis, over to you. So,
hi everyone. I'm the person on the panel who talked a little bit about why Campus decided to do this and maybe the sort of overarching themes. But I'm neither an expert in devolution nor have experience a bit of local government. But I think I'll speak to why Campus sort of picked up this issue and ran with it, and why we see such hope and possibility in the incoming government for changes that are desperately needed. So just to start with, I've been at Campus for a while, but actually I took a break for a year. And during that year, I was working on a project around the Constitutional Convention. And the biggest issue we came up with was devolution. It was the issue that we saw intersected with all the other things that we wanted to look at, whether it was House of Lords, whether it was PR, whether it was citizens' assemblies. Devolution was right slap bang in the middle of it. And it was a bit of that question of, well, do we look at devolution in itself as a holistic thing, or do we try to thread it through all of these other things? And you can imagine there was some nerdy, wonky conversations about that in the participatory design group. And what I found fascinating about this is, as an issue, devolution can sound quite dry and procedural. But I think as campaigners, as practitioners, as experts, as politicians, we all need to get into the habit of talking about it as if it's something that people care about, because they actually do. And just to take an example of this brilliant report, which I'm not just paid to pick this up, this is genuinely really good. Well, I am. But I think Lena, my colleague, will speak to the fact that when we put this out, we thought, well, this is a highly expert, really thorough, sophisticated, specialised piece of work. And we thought, how's it going to go down with people who sometimes used to reading kind of more campaigny documents? And the response we had on Twitter was insane. People loved this report. And I think one of the reasons they loved it, and certainly the reason I do, is that one of the biggest problems with devolution is that it's so confusing. It is in such a mess, and people don't know even where to start with it. They know it's important, but they have no idea how to begin to pick up the issue and run with it. Wow. So I'm going to make 3 points about that today, and hopefully end with it on a little bit of a positive note about how we move on from here. The first point is the whole "we wouldn't start from here" joke. I think people look at devolution and put it in the too difficult box immediately. You can see successive governments have done that. A lot of them have been bad faith actors, but even the ones who've tried to do things, for example, the last New Labour government, really didn't go as far as it should have done, especially given what had happened under Thatcher. And I just really don't think that's an excuse anymore. I don't think we can allow people to say, it's just too difficult, because doing nothing is also a choice. And if we see all of the things that Kai has just been saying and all of the experience that people have had at local government, things were in a really desperate state. And we know that actually this crisis can also be an opportunity. It should be an opportunity for the new government. I think it's worth reminding ourselves that in the context of the UK has a kind of default towards stability and inertia. I think that's our UK political culture. And I think any government who comes in and wants to do something radical, especially a progressive government, feels that really immediately. Whether it's coming from the Treasury, as Jonathan mentioned, or in other places around the country, we see that actually the pushback towards status quo is extremely strong, which is why we need to run a live efforts. And then I would say we just don't need to get quite front foot about the fact that devolution is a precondition for a stable, well-ordered and participatory democracy. Without that, nothing else works. So my first point is to say, yes, we're in a mess, but we can acknowledge that and say that is the reason that we need to act too urgently. My second point is a little bit this point about systems. And I think people talk a lot about in the language, and you'll hear a lot over the course of the next few days about radical politics. Like, what is radical? What does radical mean? What does it look like? Why is radical important to the Labour movement? Well, if you want to look at radical in the context of devolution, you just had to look at the 1980s and what Thatcher did. She had no qualms about coming in and putting things through. They were all like white papers as well. There wasn't even consultation. She started abolishing things left, right, centre for purely politicised reasons. Obviously, a lot of this was ideological in terms of her relationship to society and questions about public and private. But a lot of it was actually quite gung-ho and her just saying, we're just going to do something about this. Now, of course, I recognise that it's much easier to knock something down and eradicate something than it is to build it up. But I also would just call on the people who consider themselves progressive all stripes to say, actually, there's something quite radical in building, in sustaining and in growing. And all the things that Kaya said about local people's appetite for this, which I'll talk more about in a minute, is a really good place to start with that. So I think this is a 10-year project. I don't think it can all happen in one government. Jonathan said a lot of the things you could start to do immediately, which I think are really impactful and powerful. But also, and comes as a cross-party progressive organisation, I think this has to be a cross-party effort for two very pragmatic reasons. One is that it affects everyone, and it has to be seen as something that not one party will own. And the second reason is, if we want this to be sustainable and have that eye to entrenchment, we can't allow one government to run 5 years in one direction and then another government to come in and run right up the opposite direction, as we've seen. Finally, this question about public appetite. So in my work around the Constitutional Convention and working on citizen assemblies work and participatory budgeting and facilitation of that, I've really seen how quickly people move from the issues that they feel are impacting on a day-to-day level very quickly to questions of power and control. I mean, we saw this potentially a bit more controversially around Brexit, but actually it's under the surface wherever you look. People's feeling that power is extremely far away, that they feel alienated from former party politics, and that the parts of their area are just completely being neglected, both because they don't have the services, but also the really good stuff that's happening in their communities is not getting picked up and built upon. So I think there's a whole program of public education that could go alongside devolution, which runs in parallel, furnishes people with a bit of the basic understanding of how this works, and then encourages them to support any new government's attempts to take it further. One concrete example was actually to be one of the round table facilitators at the Islington Climate Assembly a few years ago. And I found that a really fascinating experience because a lot of the things people were bringing up on my table were things that local government had no power to do. So it was a whole public education exercise. I'm sure this is really familiar to you, Kaya, of being saying, like, local government can't do this. I wish they could. I wish they could do something about this. And people were like, well, they should. And my point was to say, you're absolutely right. And let's talk about devolution. That word that like no one wants to hear, but actually is really, really important. So don't allow people to say, this doesn't feel material, it doesn't feel close to people. Devolution is at the heart of what a lot of people care about. And finally, just that connection back to kind of the public culture and the mood we're in. I think the pandemic, the impact of that over the last few years, obviously 14 years of austerity, and just recently over the summer with the horrific riots that we saw, things are being shown up in a really kind of fundamental level of what state this country is in. And if we're going to do something about the kind of basic x-ray of how our country is holding together, we need to look at questions of devolution because you can't get away from that foundational issue. So very finally, I would say I really support what Jonathan says in the report, which is about this can't just be about socioeconomic change. It has to be, you have to look at the democratic angle of it and take the democratic angle of it seriously. As important as socioeconomic inequality is, democratic inequality is also equally as important, if not perhaps more so. I would push the Labour government to pick up that sort of radical reformist seal and think we can actually do something about this. We don't get into power very often, but when we do, let's really make it count. And I'd finally say there's a little bit of the working with of the grain of political culture, which is let's think about evolution as well. So it won't just happen in the first 5 years, but a lot can be done in the first 10 years. So evolution as well as alongside devolution. And perhaps that's also a revolution of some kind to be moving stuff forward. And then the final question for me and for Compass in general is to think, how can we put devolution at the core of what we talk about because it's such a cascade issue? So what I mean by cascade issue is has a ripple impact on everything else that happens. So rather than being shunted off to the side, which will only benefit the kind of inert state of UK political culture, let's bring it right to the centre of our conversation and make sure it's weaved through everything we talk about, even over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for putting lots of energy into the case for devolution. Now, before we lose Kaya, I wanted to ask her to use my chair's privilege to ask her a question, which is you rightly set out the frustrations that you have found in recent years as a local government leader. What sort of 2 or 3 things are you hoping the new government will do for you to make your role much easier, or make it much easier for you to deliver the things that you want to deliver for your community?
Thank you. I mean, I think I wouldn't ask for 2 or 3, but I'd ask for one huge thing, if I may. And the Shadow Minister before the election, Andrew Gwynn, said, I will, when you were talking about the National Care Service, I will determine the what and you will determine the how. And I think that should be, that's how I work as a leader. Do you know what I mean? We set the vision and we expect our delivery partners, whether they be council officers or other people, to determine the how. And so that's the kind of respect that I believe that local government setting the missions. They've set the missions, they've set the 5 missions. In all of them, whether it be NHS waiting times or the green economy, I see a very, very, very clear role for local government to deliver that. So I just think when we're going through those the legislation around those things, and Jim McMahon, the minister, says that this is what he wants to do, it should be devolution by default. And what I would say about what's been said is, I don't say these things tokenistically. I know how much work it's going to take. Medway and Kent have a very different stance on devolution than, Norfolk and Suffolk, who've just had a massive fight about it. London is in a very different position to Manchester. There are going to be huge fights, and there will be winners and losers of those fights. And I think, to the point made about cross-party, there will be winners and losers of that fight. But I believe in it so strongly that I hope that it is seen through, and I hope that once it's seen through, it is the norm, because I really think if we need the step change that this country does need after being, frankly, broken in every realm of society, I just think, once again, why not dream? But when we talk about trust and confidence in the police, where's the local accountability for the police? So we've got so much to do in this area. And I think that the point made about the riots, I've been thinking a hell of a lot about this as a Black leader. What we saw was horrific and terrifying. And what I also see in my community is a lot of people that feel strongly about international conflicts in a way that I've never, and it's intrinsic. It's the same way people felt about Brexit. And I really believe that at least part of that is because for 14 years, people have been ignored, people's needs haven't been met. And that's when I talk about devolution, I mean it about local government, and I mean it about us being able to deliver better, but I also mean it about local people and letting their voices be heard.
Thank you, Ian. Jonathan, I know there was a question that you wanted to be asked. So I'll ask it, and then I will throw it open to the audience. And that is, what progress do you think is being made? This report set out a range of things that we thought should happen in terms of embedding devolution, for instance. What do you think's happened so far?
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear more from the floor about that as well as you suggest. I mean, I think it's a little bit mixed signals, right? So there's a lot of good stuff, and we've talked about some of the good stuff that's coming out in terms of the Take Back Control bill, in terms of devolved functions, in terms of longer-term funding settlements, getting rid of the Dragon's Den type approach. All these things are very, very positive. But at the same time, if you listen to what ministers or Angela Rayner is saying, there are some kind of old habits that seem to be creeping back into the discourse a little bit. So, for example, there's mandation. So the central government said that there's going to be a statutory obligation to produce local growth plans. There are going to be mandatory housing targets. Right? Now, people might think that those are good and necessary things to do, but where do they sit in relation to this debate about devolution? So what does it say about the underlying relationship between central and local government, and who has responsibility for what? And this is why I think that issue of, and I remember Tony Blair doing this as well, saying, well, local government's going to have to deliver for us or else. Right? It was based on 1998 pamphlet published by somebody for Demos, I think. Right? He said that. So he's assuming that he has a right to tell local government what to do. Now, to what extent do we think that that is the purpose of local government, to deliver the missions of national government, or to maybe accept that sometimes local authorities are going to come into tension with national missions on account of the democratic demands of their citizens? I'm not for one moment suggesting we should tell national government to bust out and what happens in towns and cities, because that would clearly be crazy. But what I do think we need is a set of clear principles whereby we do not revert to the old custom and practice to say, well, you're going to do this or else. And that kind of, what we might call, I remember the language of earned autonomy. There's a bit of a whiff of this sense that this is going to be about earned autonomy, also coming from Angela Rayner and her colleagues. And I think maybe we need to problematise that a bit. So great, but mixed messages. And when you get mixed messages this early in the process, you need to think, what's it going to be like after 4 years when there's real pressure? So that's really my sense of where we are. It's a big mix.
Thank you, Dalton. Francis, would you like to come in on the involving people aspect, which was going to be perhaps the second question about devolution, particularly with the almost exclusive focus that's on about economic growth? How can the public be involved, the community be involved in the way that Kelly was describing some of the things that happened at Islington? How can people be involved in this?
Yeah, well, I think what Claire was always saying, and I think a lot of local leaders have said it, is that by necessity that a lot of local government leaders have done this. Obviously, a lot of them wanted to do it, and I think Georgia was a really great example of leading on that for intrinsic reasons. But of course, we've seen over the last 14 years, services be completely decimated, and into that vacuum, a lot of local government has tried to encourage people to step. And there's a difficult one there, right? Because you want to say, well, there are some sort of services that you expect local government to provide. And, there's a complicated thing about saying, well, we don't want actually to say we welcome a future where everyone's having to run their own libraries or they don't have a library. At the same time, there's a lot to be learned about how people do things when it is up to them to do it and when they know their local community and when they're trying to involve people. And I think that's a sort of difficult and delicate balance. And our new report, The New Settlement, which my colleague Lena has a few copies of, plug in them, it's about just that. Like, we try to look at kind of what is actually working on the ground that maybe feels a little bit sort of, future focused, utopian, and then decide, actually, how does local government and the state interact with that? Because I think a lot of what local leaders show is that you can be an enabling state. You can, shift it's all about thinking about power differently. I mean, a bit like Jonathan was just saying, if you look at it the other way around and think, actually, power, to take the old trope, power does come from the people rather than come down, right? All of this up-down hierarchical stuff is very revealing because people see actually national government is the people who have the power, and then we give unto people the power. And it's like, well, actually, no, in a democracy, power comes up from the people. You're only there to be the representatives of people. And I think that gives a good template for understanding how we should approach this better, because I think a lot of local leaders, being closer or proximate to people, understand that you work much better in collaboration. So the pandemic is a really great example for that. And to be honest, personally, I feel like I haven't heard enough from local leaders about what they did during the pandemic. Just for me personally, I live in a kind of community project which is based in Walworth, and the local council there, Southwark Council, I think was amazing over the pandemic because they reached out to community and civil society organisations and said, you know your community way better than us. Tell us people who are vulnerable. Tell us who needs food. Tell us where we can, find older people who might be isolated. And then civil society sprang into action. We had a cycle network of like 400 cycle volunteers who were delivering food to people. It was like really beautiful and amazing. And it allowed, as Kai was saying, like people to do the how better. They knew how to do it. But we all knew what was going to happen. And that took great humility from local government to say, look, we actually don't know. And I just think a lot of this should be true of national government as well. They should say to local leaders, we don't know your community like you know your community, and you don't know your community as much as the community knows itself. And so if there were just that rethink around who's sitting in control of what different actors can do in their particular role, I think that would be just a much healthier place to start. And finally, I think there are some sides of that is good. So I'm really excited about the fact that like people like Georgia and Jim are in power because they have come from that experience and they've lived that and they understand it. But I also think that there is a real culture within Westminster and Whitehall that push back against that really strongly. And unless we support those leaders in the positions that they're in and keep both the pressure and an encouragement on there, this push-pull, then it's very easy to revert back to how things have been always done, which is this very top-down, very centralised, sometimes quite punitive way of doing things. And very final point, I think the saddest thing about that is people think that's what strength looks like. And I think that makes a government look insecure rather than a strong government who says, actually, we don't know everything. And wouldn't it be refreshing to say, we're not sure, but we're going to ask our colleagues at local level who do know this better.
Great, thank you. Just on the question of COVID, I just want to illustrate what a district council had to do, and this happened across the whole of the country. During COVID, the government said, right, to district councils, we've got £3 million. We want you to distribute that to businesses that are suffering because of COVID, and you've got to do it in the next 2 months. You've got to work out who you're going to distribute it to and put in place the system that enable that to happen. And district councils all across the country stood up and did that within a matter of weeks. And I know because I spent many hours in bed talking to my wife, trying to work out how this system was going to work, because she works for a district council. So I claim credit for what I'm not going to name the district council, but made a major input into making that scheme work.
And you guys are still together as well.
And she hasn't been sacked, and the money has gone to the right businesses. But that is something where the district council had to step up, and the government, fortunately, pushed out that responsibility because they knew they could not do that on that scale as quickly as it needed to be done, and didn't have the intelligence to do it at a local level. I suspect we might be about to lose Kaya, so thank you very much for joining us. Fantastic having you on the panel. And we look forward to hearing lots of great things about what Islington is doing, engaging people in your activities. I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you. What I'm going to do, because we have got time for questions, we've still got a lot of drink, and don't seem to have had all the food delivered, but I'll take that up later. So do help yourselves to another drink if you want. I'm going to ask Stephen Carter to come up onto the panel to join us. So Stephen is a council member of Unlock Democracy, so in effect he's one of our trustees. But more importantly, for the purpose of this meeting, he was a senior advisor to Dan Jarvis, the South Yorkshire Mayor. And so he's going to join us. I don't really want to just say a few things, Stephen, just to reflect on anything that's been said.
Well, I think this all resonates very strongly with my experience at a regional level in South Yorkshire. And I think the frustrations of trying to realise the very obvious potential of a regional administration with very limited powers, and with a government that was determined to treat this really, I think, frankly, as window dressing, that there was an approach which kept real power in the hands of Westminster. And simply the experience of trying to put together a coherent plan for economic development when first of all, the level of funding being sent out to the regional administrations was less than it had been before the Conservatives came to power, but also when what money there was being handed out in dribs and drabs through the Dragon's Den approach, having to spend vast sums bidding for little pots of money that would last a year and which you might or might not get the following year. So there's definitely an improvement, I think, on that front. But there's a question as to how far this process is going to go. And I think the signs are quite promising, but the test is always really how much real power is devolved. And I think even with the best will in the world, governments, when they get to power, there's a sort of moment when all that positivity, all those plans hand over power, and they sort of hand it over, and then sort of actually letting go is quite difficult. And we'll see that particularly on the financial side. But the other thing I just wanted to sort of echo and reinforce was the importance of the political significance of devolution. And the approach has very much been, of course, even under Labour, previous Labour government, has been that devolution has primarily been driven by an economic development agenda, realising the potential of the regions, which is great. And there's copious evidence that that leading economic development at a regional level is considerably more effective. But what really interests me is the political significance of devolution. I mean, not least because we're living in an era of enormous political division and of enormous disillusionment with government, very dangerous disillusionment with government, leaving a vacuum into which populist forces are flooding. And so this is really important, I think, for the future of the UK to actually see this as as not just a matter of good administration, but of something which, for the longer term, is critical to keeping our country together. You saw evidence of the sort of disillusionment and disengagement in the push for independence in Scotland. You've seen it, in many other occasions, from then right up to the riots that we saw just this summer. And so you've got to have that sense of taking back control, but for that you do have to have real power devolve, and that means not just the regional level, but below that to the local level, and even below that to the community level. And the last thing I'll just say is that you need that substance, but you also need a story. And that's why I'm particularly in favour of the idea of conventions or citizens' assemblies to help drive this process forward. Because what those are is not just a good way of generating legitimacy and of getting buy-in and actually having good ideas for devolution, but they are a fantastic piece of theatre. And they can transform the debate in ways that really help shift the culture, and which change people's expectation and give them that sense of being empowered in a way that just a dry reform doesn't necessarily achieve. And you might want to do that in stages, because jumping straight into a national constitutional convention would probably be a little bit too startling for the horses. But if you start small and build up, I think you can really get that buy-in, and that buy-in is actually critical to achieve the potential of devolution. But a very final point, I've gone on for a long time, but the potential was so evident in South Yorkshire. That was a point that really came out very strongly. We started when Dan Jarvis was elected as mayor in 2018. The turnout was 26%. So not many people actually cared or evidently had great hopes for a regional administration. And not many years after that, I think it was 2021, or perhaps slightly later even, the polling showed that 83% of people want to see more powers for their regional governments in places that have regional governments. So, to some extent, build it when they will come. This is an agenda that really has the potential to help this country, and so it's one which we need to push forward with all our might.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Steve. And we clearly need to move quickly in Yorkshire. If there were reports today that Nigel Farage is planning on targeting 10 seats in Yorkshire because they're in second place in Yorkshire. So you need to make sure that the community feels engaged and see things being delivered and so on. But Dan only won his parliamentary seat thanks to UKIP splitting the vote last time. Wow. So I'll now throw it open to the audience if anyone's got any questions. Yes.
Oh, do you want to go first? No, I'll let you go first, and then I'll go get a drink. Let's say something.
Do you want
I was interested in what Jonathan said about a holistic approach to devolution, and my name is Jonathan Owen from the National Association of Local Councils. 40 million people in this country benefit from community, town and parish councils, but 25 million don't. So what does your report, which unfortunately I haven't read yet, but I will because it sounds absolutely fascinating. What does your report say about that first tier of devolution and governance, the community council level? Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good question. We don't really go into a huge amount of detail on parishing. But this is something that I'm doing a piece of work on separately with another colleague, where we say essentially we're arguing that the parish and local council level is there really is an opportunity to drive that forward because it's kind of such a patchy geography, particularly in towns and cities, and that the powers that local and parish councils have are radically underutilised, and that they can be, in the sense that there are a lot of powers that they could exercise but don't, right, in terms of what they are statutorily permitted to do. There's a lot of stuff that they could take on. And that if local councils were to really be pushed forward, then that could be a significant opportunity for reviving local democracy, or one of several vehicles for doing so. So we agree with you that this is an important element of the discussion, and something that we're working on in a parallel project.
I think also it's true to say that the report acknowledges recognises the risks of devolution, which is devolution down to a level and then it gets stuck. And wants to ensure that the devolution goes down to the appropriate level. So, which would, in some circumstances, clearly include parishes. What the report doesn't do, however, is try to rationalise this very complex patchwork quilt of different arrangements in different parts of the country, simply because it's a project that we don't have the resources to undertake.
Can I say that, Tom? I also think, you'll be aware of movements like flat pack democracy, things like that. I think that the parish council level offers possibly the best place to try, democratic innovation and experimentation. And to pick up the point that Jonathan made about people not using their competencies, I think that's one of the biggest things about flat pack. You say, hang on, look what you can do without actually any legal or political changes if you take that level seriously. And I think there's some of that. There's some stereotypes that people have around parish councils, just that they're looking at the local fades and then there's a bunch of busybodies who everybody knows who and I think a lot of that is a disservice to people who do work on parish councils. But I also think it could be a really good place to be like, why don't we? What I'd love to see is them do a bit of sortition onto parish councils. Like jury service, you get called up, because one of the big problems we have both at the parish council level and at local government level in total is that it's quite unrepresentative, and especially skews older and people who have an existing job. Like, the pay of a local councillor is not enough to exist on. So how do you support a family, or even just get by on your rent if you're a renter, on the basis of being a parish councillor? So it's or even indeed a local councillor. So I would love to see personally some more radical approaches to that, which could involve some experimentation at the parish council level, which would imbue it with that sense of seriousness, but also a bit of kind of fun. Why not? Give it a go kind of energy, which a lot of people could be then a really good entry level for people. And one reform to local government, level could be to say, actually, let's pay councillors properly. And then you would get more people standing for councillors, especially younger people, because I think also what you're seeing is maybe a big gap between, if you look at the statistics, a lot of people, who are retired, and that makes sense, and they have a lot of experience and time, and that's really good. But there's a big gap of people between 30 and 50 who also have really great experience, who should be encouraged to stand to be local councillors, but they can't make the time for it, amongst other things. So we've got a representative problem at that level, and I think that goes together with the fact that they've also been stripped of powers, because if you had a more representative sample, more people would be involved pushing back against that and resetting it as a kind of really important institution for our democracy.
Sure. Thank you, Francis.
Sorry, Councillor Ian Hamilton. I'm the chair of the Merseyside Association of Local Councils, and I'm the chair of Halewood Town Council, which is our larger council, and I'm also the chair of the larger councils committee at NALC. So get that out of the way. What you've just said about how do you become a councillor at certain ages, and how much it is an incredible challenge to work in the council sector. I would say below the age of 60, it's incredibly challenging, especially if you're in a job trying to make time. I'm a full-time carer, so I have additional challenges to do that. But I'll get to my question now, which is around devolution means different things to different people. Sometimes it means different things to different councillors who are going through devolution deals. Pop along to Lancashire and ask any of the councillors that are currently arguing over the deal that's trying to go through in Lancashire at the moment, and you'll get a different response from every single one of them. How pushing devolution forward do you get the message out to the average person on the street as to what devolution actually means? It's very difficult to explain to someone, especially at the moment, because there's different tiers of devo deals. Some people, you've got to get a mayoral deal. Different mayors have different powers, responsibilities. Sometimes they're going NLCC, sometimes they're taking your district and your borough councils and amalgamating them into one body, or separating them into a separate sort of like super body at the top, where powers are getting spread out. They're not involved in the lower tier of government that's already there. So there's areas in the country that are pretty much fully parished. We've got councils, talking about the town council, now said now that colloquial parish council, that image everyone has in their head of the Vicar of Dibley, that sort of thing. We've got town councils down in some areas of the country that are practically the size of old county councils. They're absolutely massive. They've taken on responsibilities from their decommissioned councils that have taken Devo deals, where they're running the graveyards, they're running, some of the services that you wouldn't imagine they'd be able to run, but they don't have the infrastructure or the legislation there to support them if something goes wrong. We in Halewood take on services from Knowsley Council rather than let them go to the wall. But we at Halewood Town Council, as a larger council, we support a lot of third sector organisations who rely on us for funding or supporting them through providing them with facilities in order to house their services. So when a service gets devolved out to us, and I'm using the term devolved loosely because a lot of times it can become asset dumping from the higher tier, we get that without any of the funding. We've got to find the funding for that, and that can have an adverse effect on the third sector organisations that we're supporting, who in themselves are providing services that were previously provided for by the borough council or by central government that are no longer there. And it starts becoming a really, really big challenge at that point. And I really loved your presentation. I've joined. So, it got to me that this sort of stuff, I love this sort of stuff when it's done right. And I think that's been part of the problem with devolution up to now. I don't think it's been done right. I think it's always been half measures. It's never been fully thought through. And there's always a loser at the bottom end. I've worked in the third sector before I got involved with the town council sector. I've ran 2 charities in Merseyside for about the last 10, 12 years. When the devolution deal happened in Merseyside, a lot of funding moved into other areas and was pulled from a lot of the third sector organisations. We ended up scrambling around, trying to get funding elsewhere, and a lot of them went to the wall as a result. There are always, this is my concern. So how does that get dealt with? When something like that gets rolled out, to make sure those at the cutting end, those at the very bottom who have stepped in during COVID and very ever now, any other sort of like major incident, it's normally the third sector that pick that up. How do we make sure that they're protected and they don't go to the wall as resources suddenly get moved around to support new models and new infrastructure to put in place? So,
I think there are a couple of questions. So first of all, and there was a question about how do you explain to people what devolution is?
Yes.
How can you demonstrate that to them? And often I think that's by having money to spend, I think, and making them aware that that's happening. But if the panel would like to answer that question, but also your second question was how do you ensure that people or those who take on responsibilities are protected from the financial consequences of basically being dumped on, I think that question is. So does anyone want to tackle
And also, if you were,
both of those? Yeah.
I think to take the second point first, this is why the money is absolutely crucial. So I think there's nothing wrong with having different models of devolution.
Yep.
The sort of, to a good extent, there are some limits, but to a good extent, the patchwork model, I think, is not a bad one. Different communities can decide the model they want and the degree of devolution they want. But the critical thing is that money has to follow responsibility. And money has to follow responsibility in a way that actually empowers that level of government that's taking on the responsibility. So it needs to be reliable, it needs to be guaranteed, and it needs to be adequate. And I think that's something which obviously is not happening at the moment. For the first question, how to explain Devo, I'm a great believer in that. Okay, once the substance is there, to some extent, the awareness will follow. That if decisions are being made at a local level, if there is, the power is there, then people will become aware of them. I think that doesn't mean that they need to have, awareness campaigns, education, and so on. And of course, the lower you put those powers, the easier it is to get that message out, I think. And the more people will feel a direct connection to the government. But the one thing I would also just add very quickly is about the need to, we've talked about coherence, about, the patchwork model. So that's, I think there needs to be some thought given, because what we're at risk of now is not just having a lot of variation, but of actually having some conflict between the different models, and serious issues about representation of different areas, about inequality in powers, about the geographies that are joined together arising, and so I think we do need a bit of a more deliberate approach. It doesn't need to be uniform, but it does need to be coherent. And one area where I think there especially needs to be coherence is in linking that local level to a national and an English and a UK level. So if we're talking about a Britain of nations and regions, if we're talking about devolved bodies having a say at the centre, which is a vital part of this, which we kind of haven't really touched on very much, then you need to make sure you have a clear, coherent model, because you need an equal balance and distribution of powers there. And particularly when we're talking about the balance between UK regions and UK nations, because the answer to the question that that has become very urgent, the question of, well, you've got devolved nations, and then you've got England, which is 80% of the population and I think more than 8% of the economy. How on earth do you have any balance between them? And the answer to that is that you have devolved nations, but you have English regions. And that, I think, can really provide a stable model for the long term, but it needs to be thought through, and it needs that coherence in how the regions relate to the centre and to the nations.
Francis or Jonathan, would you like to come in on this?
Devolution means different things to different people. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, and it necessarily provided that doesn't lead to misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And the way to avoid misunderstandings is to have conversations about them, so everybody knows. At least you know what the terms of your differences are. Even if you don't arrive at an agreement on the way forward, at least you know that you're having a conversation about the same thing, should we say? I think that when we're looking at proposals for further devolution, which the government is wanting to encourage, that perhaps the best way to make sense of it at the grassroots is to have is to involve people in those conversations. And of course, councils have different vehicles at their disposal for doing that. But if they're going to apply for more devolutionary powers, then why not try and have a conversation about it? Since it seems to be the case that most people do want more devolution into their towns and cities, then maybe they also have an opinion about what that should mean. And I would guess there's probably some good practice out there on that. I mean, I don't know what it is particularly, but one would hope that there is some good practice that could be drawn upon in doing that. Or if not, then somebody should take it.
Take that like an example.
I'll let Francis have a go.
Yeah, so I think I was really interested in hearing about your experience, and I think it's just all to the good that people who have had different experiences at different levels move between those layers, because also otherwise you create a system where it feels like us against them. Civil society, it's local government, that's good. What I will say, however, I'm not in general in favour of us-led rhetoric. What I will say, however, on this particular point is I think we sort of all have to agree that the centre is a little bit of a villain in that the centre needs to give up power. Like, the squirrels between local level and parish level and civil society, all of these other things are really, really small fry compared to what the centre continues to hold. And I think we only have to look around the world at different examples of how different countries work to see how we're the most centralised country in Europe. We're one of the most centralised countries in the world. And we just need to remind ourselves of that always, because it's not so much that the centre is should be seen as the villain of all this. It can be a good partner in that the current Labour government can decide to devolve down, but that should be an expectation that it does that. And in fact, all of this power that's been sucked up to the centre wasn't there like this before. So I think all of the things that Jonathan raised in his report about this weird Stockholm syndrome and, Andy Burnham going cap in hand to government, it's all the wrong way around. It's like saying, no, hang on, you guys stole all our power and defenestrated our local systems. Like, what the hell, basically? Like, give it back. And I think there needs to be a little bit more of resetting that in a way, not necessarily an antagonistic way, but in this sort of firm and continuous way. I think also, to your point about people and understanding this, I think we have to really start by saying to everybody, this is confusing. Don't feel, ashamed if you find this confusing. Everyone finds it confusing. It's extremely confusing. Even the experts find it confusing because it is changing on a day-to-day basis, And I think that feeling of alienation is because people just don't really understand how it works, where the different parts of government do different services. Like, no one can tell you that perfectly in other parts of the country. I would defy even like the biggest experts, even Jonathan, I imagine. If you imagine there's a pub quiz about various parts of the country where different services sit, it's extremely difficult to keep up with it, right? Like, so to just tell people it's not you, it's us, basically. And then final point, I think we go back to first principles stuff. So a lot of what people, although I'm a big, massive, process nerd and, worked a lot on democratic process, people do want to understand how it relates to outcome. And so what I always go back to is first principles on, you care about the material outcomes, but you care about how those decisions are made because they affect the outcomes, right? So I go back to first principles, which is to say, well, devolution will be greater control, greater localized control, be also more power to you as a citizen. It will be greater responsiveness of local government because they'll have that power and ability and scope and latitude to do the things that they can do at the moment. They're just desperately getting by, right? As you know. It'll be more representative. So, you'll have more representation locally. You'll get, your local institution will begin to look more like the population it serves. And also that local power will advocate for you at the national level. So my own area, I grew up in Greater Manchester, we famously didn't want a mayor and now we have one, we all love him. So it's a bit what Stephen said about people sometimes have to be encouraged to take more power back and say, this is something that's good. I will say, obviously, it should rest at the level of mayor. It's really important that Andy feels that he is responsible to local councils, which I feel like as a politician he does. But it's really important that people can see the benefits of that, to say, this is what that would mean for you, and this would mean that we could do X, Y, and Z, which currently we can't do. So I think that process of political education is an ongoing thing, but hopefully as things change, people will also become more wise to it. And the point that Stephen made about Constitutional Convention being a really good way of doing that is the best way of doing a public education exercise is to have a national conversation about it before citizens subject to that.
Just so that, it puts me in mind of the 2014 independence vote in Scotland.
Yeah.
And that as soon as you had that vote, and as soon as you actually everyone's votes count the same, and there's a decision to be made on this, suddenly the discussion about the future of Scotland absolutely caught fire. Mm. And I think if you had something similar in the UK, I think it would do the same. It's perhaps not a bad thing again to kind of have some lower level exercises first. But I think even if you didn't, that if you actually just did this, suddenly it would catalyse a massive national conversation in a way that actually really healthy for the country.
Right. I think we have time for one more question, possibly two more if people have quick answers. Yeah.
I'm just on, and I put the recommendation good video. I think that's pretty. But if the coalition government introduced a local on that, gave community right to challenge the community to challenge to have service provision, did not think of the merit in extending that right to challenge to regional government and coalition government. The councils can have methods to challenge regional government and national government for powers that they feel that spoke to their local area. I stepped apart my question goes back to that need to gain first that community act to challenge revenue. Most people through them are kind of the even council outlaw ready first. How do we get that kind of butterfly between?
Okay. Who will confess to being a localism expert again?
Not me, really. I think the premise of your question is correct. That there are a lot of powers that are already there that are not being used and at different levels, and probably a lot of good reasons for that. Because people have been so under siege for the last decade that it's really quite difficult to think about, like we're going to invoke our power of general competence or our right to challenge when there's not really anybody to do anything. But I do think that kind of comes back to the point I made about political culture and people just kind of really trying to kind of rewire themselves in a way that says we have a right to do this and we have a right to do things in ways that nobody's thought of that are not prohibited by law. What those might be, I don't know. But I agree with your idea that all these powers should be extended to whatever new units of government or governance emerge, including the region, the regional tier certainly.
I'll just say one quick thing on that, which is I think a lot of this should, as Jonathan said, also just come from the bottom up. If you activate people, they realise there's actually maybe much more that they can do, and that sort of ask for forgiveness, not the permission thing, I think can be really powerful, right? Because it is. That's why flat democracy was so powerful to a lot of people, because they realise that actually there's much more we can do. And I think sometimes maybe this is part of English culture, which I think is a problem. People are quite diffident to do things, and actually, I'm working a bit with the Incredible Edible, and the work that you can actually do there is like, no, you can go take this piece of piece of land that you can use, encouraging people to step into their power a bit, and then to come up against something. It's really infectious. It's really kind of intoxicating when people have this experience of, I could do this thing in public as just a normal citizen, and then even better to have a council that encourages and enables that. Can be people's way into politics, but often it starts at the community level, as I'm sure you'll know, with people like wanting to get something done or wanting to, start a small project. And the good news is, if you have a supportive local council who is enabling, then they have a good experience of that and they want to do more and more of it. And it's not this stop, can't, bureaucracy, red tape. But unfortunately, a lot of people are put off by that because they think there is a lot of that there, which obviously in some places there is. But in other places, there's a wide open vista, like go, do some guerrilla gardening.
Yeah, I'll just add a really quick point to that. Again, I think the challenge is going to be a lot easier if there are precedents for it, and if there's a real guarantee that the money and the power is going to follow the challenge elements. Because, again, the reason why it's not happening is because local governments are absolutely stretched to the maximum. So the idea of taking on more at whatever level it is fairly daunting. That's got to be not just power and money, but also capacity. And I think the one important point there as well is actually it does go both ways to some extent. I think we need a conversation about this principle of subsidiarity. I think is extremely important. In that discussion, you need to be playing devil's advocate a little bit to think about, well, what do we need to keep at the national level, or at least what do we need in order to ensure that there is a level of national dialogue and coherence around things that really matter, so we don't end up with a situation where, for example, one particular local authority decides that, education doesn't matter, or that, we can cut benefits locally to the point that people are really struggling. There needs to be some thought about the consequences as well. But that's going to be a really open and frank discussion with, in which the lower levels are very much empowered rather than it just being something that comes down on eye.
Can I just make one more point on that, which is like we've got
the last question.
We've got a government that's asking people to come forward with proposals for devolution. That very same government could very well say to local government, look, we want you to use your powers of general competence. Go out and think of ways of using your powers of general competence and your community rights to challenge. So I think actually that's one area where some messaging from the top could also be really helpful. If only for the reason we have municipal Stockholm syndrome. So if Andrew Arabia says jump, by using your power of general competence, then maybe there'll be some jumping. Who knows? And finally,
Dawn Locke, farm CLP. The problem, it seems to me, the problem with devolution is the same as with PR. The ones who can be effective are the ones who've got the power and are less likely to devolve power. We've just got a new government with a huge who's gained a huge amount of power. Do you think the new government will go for this devolution? Then
In mind.
well, there you go, Dave.
That's a great question, Dawn. I mean, as an organisation who's campaigns both on PR and devolution, I'd obviously have to kind of, optimism of the will and forget about the first bit. No, I think your question is obviously really right, and obviously it's one of the biggest obstacles that stands in the way. Is like, why would anybody just choose to give away power? But I think that maybe the calculation is different on the two issues. So without making this a session about PR, I think the opportunities for PR will come when we don't expect it. And I think some of that will come out of crisis. But in the meantime, organisations like Unlock Democracy and Compass are building kind of foundations. Of course, you've seen the membership huge and switch to some big supporters with PR, whilst at the same time showing that it would be better for Labour, that it would be power more often, and all of the other good reasons that are like self-interested reasons, not just all of the, moral and democratic reasons they should do it. But on devolution, I'm a bit more hopeful from the sense of expediency, because I just think there's so much the Labour government has committed to doing and intrinsically wants to do that it needs to devolve power for. Like, even if you take an issue like GB Energy, you hear Edmund Ladd talking about this. He says one of the biggest problems about GB Energy is how do you get the local government partners to be strong enough, to be experienced enough, resourced enough to be able to roll it out, and even to respond to questions like community power in order to achieve kind of fully renewable energy by 2030. It's a hugely ambitious and wonderful target. You're going to need some partners in that who know their local areas, think about their skills and training courses, like their particular local industries, so they can pivot to helping roll out this mission. That's just one hugely ambitious policy. But if you look across the whole missions area, you think, I'm not sure how central government, even with all the power we've just talked about that it has, is actually going to deliver on a lot of this stuff. And it's this weird thing of saying, yes, in some respects, it's good that national government can do all of these quite ambitious things, but when it comes to the actual practicalities of delivering the thing on the ground, they're going to need to devolve some power. So I'm just a bit more optimistic that this will happen. I just think, to pick up the points that Stephen and Jonathan have made, it needs to happen in a way that's coherent, that's thought through, that's sustainable, and that's democratic. It could happen by sort of trickle down and continue this chaotic messiness that we have, or it could happen in a bit more thought through, open, transparent way, and that's, I suppose, what everyone on the panel wants to happen.
Just to agree with Francis on that, I mean, I think that one of the experiences I had in South Yorkshire was trying to get retrofit programs off the ground, and the government, there's no way you can do that unless you have local buy-in. Simply in terms of getting enough people with the skills to carry out retrofits, finding where the most the highest priority populations to do it in, and so on and so forth. So I think there will be a practical reason for them to do this, and also there's just a level of discontent and anger that hopefully will focus minds as well, as we've seen with the riots. So I hope that's going to be the case. I mean, really, are they going to do it? I do believe that this government is serious about it. I think that they've made commitments and they will follow through on it. So I'm hopeful of that. And I think that once that happens, it is a bit of a virtuous cycle. So you get more powers at local level, which sparks, suddenly you've got Manchester. And look how much Manchester has changed the debate about devolution. It's like, my God, suddenly I want to have that in my place, and the political pressure for it, I think, really, really grows. And you can imagine similar things around, if you can have local level citizens' assemblies or whatever to other aspects of this devolution of power. It's not just about regional governments, that will also start to create a snowball effect. So I think there's everything to fight for.
Thank you. And I think
as long as we don't hear from the local government minister that he or she is requiring local councils to collect their rubbish every week, then I think we're okay. And the minister first announces that, we know that actually devolution is a bit off track. But thank you.
One final point, just on PR. If in 3 or 4 years' time you've got a government with a majority of 170 odd, which thinks it's going to get wiped out at the next election, then you'll get PR.
Yeah, exactly.
On that note, thank you everyone for coming. You have disappointed me by not drinking the 12 bottles of wine and eating all the canapes. But you can take a bottle home if you want, because we paid for them. So I don't think they give us any discount for not consuming them. So thank you. I think that was a very good session. And with some quality questions from the audience. Thanks. And before the panel rush off, we need to have a quick photograph in front of the Unlock Democracy banner. And Sean is going to tape on his camera and my camera.